And now, friends, the end is near as we raise the final curtain for this last session. This last session has two parts. In the second part, we will have Ask Me Anything session with Josepha Haden Chomposy, which will be moderated by Shilpa Shah. On our behalf, she'll ask questions to Josepha. Josepha is the executive director of the WordPress project, helping to coordinate and guide volunteer efforts across the ecosystem. Josepha is very active on her in her podcast titled WP Briefings, and she blogs at josepha.blog. Now comes the first part. In the first part, this amazing lady Josepha Haden will be in a fireside chat with a jazz musician who runs Audrey Capital, an investment and research company. And he also is the co founder of an open source publishing platform we call WordPress, which now powers 40% of all sites on the web. He is the founder and CEO of the Automatic, the company behind the WordPress.com, WooCommerce, Tumblr, WordPress VIP, Jetpack, and so many other lovely products. He also blogs at Matt, ma.tt, and he goes by the name Matt Mullenweg. Friends, WordCamp India 2021 presents Josepha and Matt in a fireside chat.
So Matt, the WordCamp India group sent us over a few questions that they especially want to be able to ask you. So I'm going to just get us started with a couple of the most interesting questions that I saw in there, and then see where we go from there. The first one that I have from them is, in your experience, what has been the role of India as a country in the growth of WordPress?
I think largely thus far, it's been one, pretty influential in some of the early visits I did. So when WordPress was just getting started, and I used to go to every single WordCamp.
Oh, that was so long ago.
I made it over to India with actually one of my best friends, a gentleman named Om Malik, who was born and raised in, I think, Delhi. And you know, we met. He was one of the earliest users of WordPress, and we became friends in San Francisco. And I forget the year, but it would have been fairly early on, first 4 or 5 years of WordPress. We made it over together, and were able to both give a talk and meet the local community. And so that the sort of early feedback that was coming from that community was very, very helpful for defining those early years of WordPress, especially as we really finalized our internationalization support. Just had context of, much like many other countries, India is more than just one thing. There's so much richness and diversity and differences across the different regions, which I don't think I'd been very familiar with before. And then really from the beginning as well, there's a story of all the contributors. And probably a lot of the people listening here have been involved with WordPress for some number of years as contributors. Yeah. And I was so excited. Do you remember how many folks traveled from India to the last WordCamp Europe?
I don't off the top of my head, no.
I want to say it was more than 100. And that was so exciting. And I really love meeting everyone. I felt like those are some of the also people who were coming up to me the most and saying hi, which was exciting, which really makes me look forward to when we can have a WordCamp India in person, because it'll be definitely at the top of my list to attend in person.
Yeah. And I think that the WordPress community in India is so unique in the way that it binds itself together. Like, all of the WordPress community is really connected, and our interconnectedness makes us really resilient. But I know that in my experience with the WordCamps that I have helped to guide, I've never actually been to one. It's always so wonderful to see like a true community feeling, even in the middle of the admittedly very complicated and sometimes stressful work of getting an event like this together. And I think that they did that again this year as well. It's been, for me, an absolute treat working with them all the way through. So yeah. The next question that they sent over for us was about growth in newsletter services like Substack. So the question is, in your mind, in our mind, these newsletter services are no different from a WordPress powered blog with emailing features. So why and how do you think the newsletter service has grown in 2020? And how can WordPress help folks that want to start a newsletter service? That's a big question.
It is a good question.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything is possible in WordPress, right? So you could easily build something that, from a user point of view, was just like a Substack or others. But often these things are not easy to do and require putting together lots of different plugins, or might have a barrier to entry, which is a lot for some folks. I think there's two ways we can address that. One is by education. People can actually get through a lot of steps if there's a good guide.
Yeah.
And so, a great guide around how to build something just like Substack on your WordPress blog where you own everything would be, I think, really valuable and really popular. Second is when we make that guide, we'll probably see some steps that we could eliminate or smooth friction points, which we can make easier for people to get through. And so whenever we see something like a Substack pop up in the market, I think it's a great moment for reflection to see where can that educate us to where we can improve our own products, plugins, and educational material.
Yeah. Speaking of the educational material that we have, I know that there's a contributor day that happened with WordCamp India, and there's been a lot of work on documentation and certainly on the training and learn.wordpress.org area of things. And so I'm very excited to see what they all pulled together in that time. Online contributor days are really fascinating to me. I've been kind of observing them from afar when I can, and yeah, I thought this one was quite exciting the way they pulled it together.
Also talking about some of the awesome stuff coming out of India, on the on my automatic side of things, we just made a pretty large investment in a company based in India, which is Titan, and it's one of the it'll be a big part of how WordPress.com offers email going forward. And it's also been exciting to see commercial enterprises. I believe the Astra theme is from a company based in India as well. And that's one of the most popular themes in the WordPress world. So it's fun to see those things pop up.
Yeah.
I was curious for you. I know we've mentioned a few times, like wanting to get back to in-person events.
Yeah.
As 2021, 2022, people start to get vaccinated, COVID starts to go down. What do you think is the future of WordCamps and how are they going to look?
Yeah. In the short term, the future of WordCamps is very careful. There is an ongoing conversation about how we can bring everybody back together in a way that keeps us connected and provides all of that normal WordPress feeling, but also is incredibly safe. And it's hard. There's a lot of unknown stuff, but the success with the vaccinations that we've seen so far have been really heartening, and fingers crossed that we can start allowing quite small in-person events starting around in Q3 of 2021. But from a long-term standpoint, I think that some of the things I hope we keep from this experience of not being able to get together is to always have a clear concept of the fact that we can, with a little bit of pre-planning and a little bit of intention, make sure that our events, even if they are in person, have an online component that helps to make sure, again, that the education that we're trying to provide there gets to as many people as possible without necessarily having that barrier to entry of having to physically go to a place and pay your time to get there and pay your money to get there. And so I'm hoping that we see a little more consistent planning about that in our in-person events so that we can keep offering kind of a more global mindset to our events overall.
if the number of hours that were spent in previous years
Yeah.
putting together in-person events were put in towards our online WordPress.org resources, what do you think would be different?
Oh gosh. um, so I thought that first off, I thought online events were going to be way easier to organize than in-person events, and I was incredibly wrong about that. So that's number one thing. I thought that it was going to be a lot simpler. Um, so to put together a WordCamp takes about 170 hours from the most active organizers and anywhere between like 80 to 120 hours from everybody else. And so it's a huge undertaking.
Wow.
And I think that we have some areas where it just won't apply outside of in-person events. And so taking some of that time and putting it into things like making sure that when we have videos that we stream, we have some captioning and translation available when it's possible, and trying to make sure that those activities are as accessible as possible. And I have been wondering, and I don't actually know the answer, but I've been wondering if there is an opportunity for us as a community to foster a text-based, just like in line with the event sort of part of that learning opportunity, because anyone who is hearing free, anyone who needs assistance, like it's incredibly hard to get right now, and I'm wondering if we can be more intentional about that. I don't actually know the answer. I haven't done a lot of research in it, but I'm interested to see what the folks who have feedback about this talk come back and tell me.
I would definitely hope to see more documentation, more tutorials, just sort of a richer amount of material on WordPress.org, because that is, by definition, the most accessible thing we could possibly do, because people can access it from pretty much any device, in any place, at any time.
Mm.
And so when I think of how do we open this up to the world, you know, it's even more important than things we might do for the real-time events,
Yes.
which are by definition only going to be accessible to the people who happen to be at the event.
Yeah. I was actually just asked recently about like the training versus education materials that we can offer in the WordPress ecosystem. And I feel like the 0 to 101 level of content is really not, it's really lacking. And I think that that's one of those make or break moments. Like before you can get to your WordPress 101 stuff, which assumes that you have set up your website, you've got your hosting sorted, you've figured out a theme, and you know, like the basic terminology, just the basic information, like this is what a host is. And also this is the difference between a page and a post, and like really foundational things that we, in a lot of our 101 content, don't see a lot of time dedicated to. I think that that also is an area where we certainly can help with that. It's a thing that we live and breathe in the WordPress project. So yeah.
Also, like 95% of our videos, if not more, are essentially videos of someone standing on the stage talking to people who are there in person.
Yes.
And we splice the slides in, but you know, if the video is the primary way people are consuming, there's much better ways to present that information and to make videos. And then it'd be really exciting to see the community get involved with captioning those, which can happen versus happening real time, which is always never going to be perfect, doing it in kind of a thoughtful way, or recording other voiceovers. You know, how neat would it be to have, you know, tutorial videos that then could have essentially voiceover in every language that the community speaks. But speaking of contributions, because there are so many ways for people to get involved, I know that you recently led WordPress's first Women and Non-Binary release, and I was curious what that experience was like for you.
Oh man, this is one of my, this is like to date my crowning achievement of anything. I look like I'm reading something, but I'm just gazing off into the middle distance as I think about it. So something that I think most people don't know, first off, about that release is that I and a number of other contributors worked toward that for 2 or 3 years before we even got to the point of saying like, okay, we're ready to give it a try. There was a lot of infrastructure work that happened and a lot of just training of future mentors. And I think that not everybody who participated in that process over 2 or 3 years was aware of the fact that that's what the end goal was. But then to just kind of bravely move forward with 5.6 with all of those voices that we don't always hear a lot from in technology was, on the one hand, terrifying. I felt as though for all of those contributors who were putting a lot of trust and faith in what we were doing in WordPress and how the processes work and how core works, like it felt as though if any one thing went wrong, it's because I had personally failed everyone, period. And so I was feeling a lot of weight from that. And I think also for women and non-binary folks, especially in technology, there is a feeling of like, we're here and we're doing this, but we have to do it right for everyone in the future, and have to always like make sure that we didn't get anything wrong because of all of the people who came before us. Like there's a big feeling in it. And so I think that it was really good. And I am so proud of what that team of people pulled together and how brave they were in doing things like pulling out things at the last second because it wasn't going to serve our users well, or pushing for things in spaces that we otherwise wouldn't see. It is probably the honor of my now 6 years here full time with WordPress to be able to work with that team. And yeah, they worked for like 8 solid months to learn how to do it all and partner with people during the 5.5 release, and then all the way during the 5.6 release, and then many of them also for the next like 3 or 4 weeks after it. So it was scarier than anything, but also I 100% would do it again. So
I just looked it up. The 5.6 release has had now over 30 million downloads.
It's so exciting.
That's a lot.
It's
30
so
million
many.
of anything is a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some people listening here that are probably inspired by the story you just shared. So if
hopefully.
they would want to be involved in future releases, right?
Yeah.
Because every future release is open to anyone who wants to be involved. How should they start that journey?
So it is a steep incline to get started, but it is much less steep than it used to be. And so I will give that general caveat. But we do all of our coordination on make.wordpress.org/core, and then also in the Making WordPress Slack instance. All of that happens in there. And right now, like as of the time of the airing of this, we should have a call for the next round of people who want to participate in our major release 5.8. And that will include a call for people who feel like they know how to do the work and are ready to show up and participate, and also people who want to do something called ride along, where they can learn more about the process as it's going and help to kind of maintain our notes and keep everything moving in the behind the scenes side. So yeah, very exciting. 5.8 is our summer release.
One of the things I learned as we were preparing for this talk is that the majority of India's population is under 30. And also we heard from the WordPress community that most of the contributors from India are what they term as veterans, which I guess means over 30. Yeah. Which I guess we both are too. Are we veterans?
Of course. Sorry. Yes, you've been here with WordPress for 17 years. I think you're a veteran, Matt.
Okay, I'll take that. What is the question that begs then is how can we get more folks, younger folks, involved in contributing to WordPress?
Yeah.
I guess specifically in India.
Yeah. There are 2 versions of younger contributors here, I think, and you kind of touched on it with the "are we veterans" kind of feeling. I think there are literally the people who are age-wise younger, but then also people who are young in contribution, both to open source and to WordPress as a whole. For folks who are seasoned in open source but not in WordPress, I think that the answer lies in some of our triage practices that we are starting to revive. It's been a while since we had any kind of like dedicated triage that wasn't specifically about a release. But as I've been talking to all of our past committers and long-term contributors, like for the ones who felt most successful and felt the most resilience when working in open source in general, it is the people who learned via triage as opposed to learning by just being dumped in the deep end. So we're going to give that a second go. Triage in general, see how we can do that. But as far as like the young people who are into JavaScript and Jamstack, like we have a solution for JavaScript, come and hang out in Gutenberg. We are filled with JavaScript. But for like people who are wanting to contribute using younger, hipper languages other than JavaScript, I don't actually have a clear answer for that. So.
Luckily, JavaScript and PHP covers a lot.
So much room.
They're both really interesting. When I thought about this, I definitely think of, if you are a more seasoned contributor, think about adopting someone, mentoring someone.
Yes.
Almost everyone who's been successful in WordPress, including myself, has been had someone kind of guiding them. And mentorship sounds like a scary big thing, but it's actually, it can be very lightweight. It can be, helping along with what Josepha just said, which is like, hey, here's a ticket, which seems interesting. Why don't we work on it together, or screen share, or talk through it? If you are one of the less seasoned folks who wants to get involved, don't be shy about reaching out to someone who you see really active on track, or on the contributors, on the P2s or something, and saying, hey, how did you learn to do what you do? And can you give me some pointers? One thing that's pretty universal about WordPress is the community is very friendly. And it is very exciting for someone who is seasoned to get that sort of question. And there's a way to ask it as well, which is like, can you point me to things where I can learn, versus like, can you teach me every single thing, step by step? There are lots of online resources. Finally, for everyone, I would add that, and this is contributors of all ages and all seasonings, how can we make it more fun? If you kind of looked at everything you're doing and within WordPress and say, what would make this 10% more fun? That would also make it more interesting to folks getting involved. And it's easy to lose sight of the fun, especially for tackling some tricky issue or something that's contentious. But I mean, end of the day, that's the reason most people are involved with WordPress in the first place, is to the extent we have made it fun to be involved or not. So consciously trying to make it more fun, I think, is a very good mental exercise for all of us to apply.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of fun element to it, but also quite a bit, I think, impact driven is a thing that I see for WordPressers in general. Last week, I tweeted a question of like, who outside of WordPress leadership really helped you to kind of find your way? And it's been really interesting to look at those stories, because there's like a mixture of, I had this wonderful experience with this contributor versus like some person who now is a seasoned contributor gave me this book about WordPress because they thought I would find it interesting. Like there is a bit of like, there was enjoyment, there was a call to like, I want to make that better for people who use WordPress like me. And so, yeah, a bit of fun and a bit of believing that what we're doing with open source is good.
I should also say that I think learning is fun. I think impact is fun. There is nothing, if you've thought about doing it, there's nothing like that feeling, knowing that code you've written or translations you've created are literally running millions of times, probably per minute, somewhere in the world. And that's kind of cool to think of. Things that you typed with your hands are now being executed countless times, every second of every single day, and those contributions have the potential to live on, could be for decades. There's code written in early WordPress that you might not have expected to be there 17 years later, but it still is. So there's always a potential that also becomes somewhat of a legacy that can even outlive ourselves.
Yeah, I think I think that is an interesting concept. So you frequently say that open source is an idea that will change a generation. And I have been wondering lately if like this group is that group that has been changed by that idea, the idea that you should be able to own your own copy of the software and study it and learn from it and all of that. I don't know where I was going with that, except to like, I'm obviously very excited about open source, and it is a thing obviously I find fun. So
Well,
just
it
having a
would
thought nearby.
it wouldn't be surprising if I believe India is the largest democracy in the world.
Mm,
Um, if that also was drawn to software freedom.
yeah, yeah. Um, my most recent podcast was about software freedom and WordPress being free versus WordPress offering freedom, and specifically those 4 freedoms of open source and
Mm.
practical applications of them. It's quite short, so if anyone has not yet listened to it, I think it's interesting.
And where
Yeah.
can they find this podcast, Josepha?
They can find that on wordpress.org/news. And right there in the sidebar, there's a link to the podcast. All of them are in a tidy row.
And this is a new thing we're doing this year, right? So the idea is
Yeah.
doing one of those, is it every other week, every week?
Yep.
What's the
Every
plan?
2 weeks. Every 2 weeks.
Cool. So fortnightly, there will
Fortnightly.
be some exciting new content for you in podcast form.
Yeah. And it's always super short. Like you could do it while making tea almost. So
I like it. As someone who
yeah.
loves tea.
Yeah. Let's see. I had actually a question for you. So we are, as I mentioned, in the process of getting a team together for 5.8. And lately, we've had a lot of posts out about the timelines that I am hoping for on behalf of the WordPress project for full site editing in Core. And so what I want to ask you about is not about how you feel about full site editing in Core, but actually, based on our experience, you and I, our collective experience of helping the merge during 5.0, like what learnings do you think we have, again, you and I, as we work to merge full site editing in here? I've been talking about it all day. I'm so interested.
Learnings from 5.0. I've said it a few times already, but I will repeat like the importance of marketing and documentation. And great documentation actually is a form of marketing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one area for that we can expand quite a bit is developer facing. So if you imagine the type of content that might be on like a CSS Tricks or Smashing Magazine that takes the technical ability and puts a narrative around it and sort of walk people through things. I think we should try to get as much of that as widely consumed as possible. And it's totally appropriate for the WordPress.org/news blog.
Yeah.
I think we want to get those translated onto all the Rosetta sites. I think that we want to do video versions of it, just as many versions as possible to kind of walk people through why we're excited about this.
Yes.
And show them how to do something with it. I've always been very inspired by the Kathy Sierra approach to marketing, which is don't say how great you are. Show someone how great they're going to be if they learn this thing.
Yes.
So like the superpowers that they'll get or how they'll impress their friends once they learn this thing. And full site editing should give people the ability to create customized sites that would be impossible before without essentially coding a theme sometimes from scratch. And if just how quick, even for people who are very advanced with WordPress and who can code themes like myself, I'm so excited by how quick it makes things. So for things that would have taken me hours to do, I can now do in literally seconds. And that is very, very exciting because it sparks my imagination to see the creativity that will be unleashed with this.
Yes.
And particularly at a time when it feels like the web is becoming more homogenous, like more and more things are looking the same. I'm excited for it to get a little weird and different, for people to be able to express their creativity and individuality more.
Yeah.
Because if there's something else I learned, and it's something I struggle with when we talk about India as a country or something like that, is that every individual is so unique.
Yes.
And it's interesting to look at maybe demographic trends or statistics from a geographic region. But at the end of the day, every single individual has their own story, their own path, their own passions.
Yeah.
And I love when I think blogs are probably the best way that gets expressed online today. And I'm excited for them to become richer and more creative.
Yeah. One of the current learnings that I'm looking at as we head toward this merge, I have gotten quite a bit of feedback about my timeline being aggressive. For anyone who's not yet heard, I'm hoping for a user-facing usable prototype in the Gutenberg plugin by April, which is it's aggressive, right? Like I can't deny that. But also I think it's really possible. I think it's an attainable goal. Um, and I think that one of the things that I learned from the 5.0 merge that I'm hoping to bring the community with us on for this full site editing merge is that when we get it into the plugin, I hope that that's when the users that we didn't hear a lot from our first time around. So everybody in our extender group of our community, our theme authors, our plugin authors, agency partners, whom very much we missed the feedback from the first time around. I hope that that is when they see that it's time to come and like give us that feedback so that we can catch as many use cases as we possibly can before we start heading into the merge process for core. I think that that's at the heart of why I want to get this out there sooner rather than later into an area that's safe for us to work in. I think the plugin is the safest area for us to like catch all of that feedback and iterate quickly so that we can, when it's getting out to users, almost 40% of the web at this point. Don't be scared, people. It's as close as we can absolutely make it with the community of extenders and implementers that we have. That's my primary learning. And that's kind of why I'm hoping to drive us toward April. So yeah.
And to clarify, that's the Gutenberg plugin, right? So if someone installs the Gutenberg plugin, and I just checked, we have over 300,000 active sites with the Gutenberg plugin. So
yeah,
I guess I also don't see a full site editing as even 1/10 as big a deal as the 5.0 merge. So I haven't thought about it that much. But you did remind me of one thing, which is sometimes when people said they were unhappy with the timeline or didn't think the timeline was achievable,
yeah,
it was kind of a coded way to say that they wanted some things to be different and they weren't seeing those changes happening. So sometimes it can be way disagreements about timeline could be actually really if there's disagreements about scope or how something works.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen a little bit of that with FSC.
We actually, if I may just talk admin-y things for a second, like the community has been participating in the full site editing quite a bit more actively than they were the first time around. And yeah, the big fight of like, get it in or don't. The first time around, we're not seeing this time. And it's not because we're perfect at our communication, and it's not because we're perfect at how we are helping to like get the marketing out. But I have been so excited and relieved to see our community members really like feeling as though this is something that they can participate in with us and giving us as much feedback as they have available. I encourage it. It's the only way we can make the thing better is if they tell us what's broken. So yeah.
It also doesn't hurt that phase 1 of Gutenberg, which is the block editor at its core, has had some great momentum lately.
Yes.
And I've heard from a lot of folks, maybe you have too, who said, I didn't like it at first.
Yes.
I didn't like it later. I tried it again recently, and I was pleasantly surprised. And often, some have gone to be full converts and really realized the vision of the block editor. And but even just the sort of passive supporters, I'm really excited about because it was By the way, I would say that's something that I appreciate so much about the WordPress community.
Mm,
It's totally fine if people didn't like it in the first version,
yeah.
but that they kept the open-mindedness to try it later, I
Yep.
think really speaks to them being awesome people. and
Yeah.
if you're someone who still doesn't like Gutenberg, that's also okay. All I ask is that, down the line, periodically, try it again and do it with an open mind, because
Yeah.
it is getting better every single day. Full site editing will be the same way.
Yeah.
Phase 3, which is the workfw stuff, will be the same way. And then phase 4 with multilingual.
I'm
Each
impossibly
one,
excited about phase 3 for the record. I think it's going to be great.
each one, at some version of it might not be a fit for you or not, but it will get better and better and better literally every day that we work on WordPress, which is basically 365.
Not even basically, literally 365. There's someone working on that thing.
and that's exciting. And that's, to me, I think part of what makes me such an optimist in life in general, because seeing that progress isn't always in a straight path, but dedicated and
Yes.
persistence effort from people kind of working together on the same thing can have such incredible results, and it compounds over time. I just did a blog post, so I'll plug my blog, ama.tt, that talks about sort of compounding interest and compounding effort and everything like that.
Yeah.
And there's so many things, including, like, you can think in life, like the compounding interest of good sleep or exercise or healthy diet,
Yeah.
or spending less than you make. Each one of those compounds over time, and when you stretch that out over decades, how much that compounds too can actually be pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And I think WordPress's success in the market thus far is a function of our compounding effort to stay close to our users, and for those users and developers working together to make every every iteration move
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking about that. It's funny that you wrote a blog post about it. I was just talking about that in relation to the way that we have tried to proactively make the WordPress community a welcoming space. It was like a list of 20 tiny little tweaks that happen just kind of ad hoc for each team as they go. And it's not heavy lifting. It's just consistent reiteration of, like, this is what this meeting is about. This is who we are. This is what we try to not do. This is what we definitely don't do here. This is how we stay globally minded. And just like building on those little habits that each of our team reps in the last 3 or 4 years maybe have been instituting across the space, have ended up, and in the moment it doesn't look like a lot, but the compounding effects of having at this point like 50 people who routinely do those small things that make a big difference once you've got the accumulated wave. I think that works in every section of the WordPress project, the CMS, the community management side, all of it. So yeah.
Cool. Is that a good place to wrap up? It's been a really fun discussion.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent place to wrap up. Again, WordCamp India, thank you so much for having us. I hope it was interesting for you all.
Where can they find more of you, Josepha? When they follow?
You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Josepha Haden, and I will share a link. I also have a blog, josepha.blog, and I post a lot of stuff on wordpress.org/news. What about you, Matt? How can they find you?
My blog is ma.tt. I also have matt.blog for photos and such. And I am Photomat, which is spelled PHOTOMATT on Tumblr, Instagram, and Twitter. So please follow there. I love talking and sharing about open source and jazz and just all those sorts of things.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll see y'all.
Thanks, Al.
Bye.
Bye.